Pennsylvania, 1863. The Civil War is a bloody stalemate. By the end of June of that year, Confederate General Robert E. Lee boldly moves his army of nearly 60,000 men into Union territory. While most of the battles of the American Civil War have been fought in the South, Lee decides the moment is right to invade Union soil. Lee's plan? Destroy as many military posts as possible in Maryland and Pennsylvania while Union armies defend Washington, D.C. One key target is Camp Curtin, outside of Harrisburg, the largest military supply depot in the North.
The strategy of Lee's attack on the North is not primarily military, it's primarily political. And he's going to try to essentially to defeat Lincoln politically. What he hopes is a massive defeat of the North will encourage people to lose faith in the war.
But as Lee's main force moves north, a skirmish erupts in Gettysburg between two cavalry units.
Confederate General Heath had a division at Cashtown, and he wanted to move over to Gettysburg in order to get some shoes that were in a factory there. That was the only reason he went. In this fashion, he moved without any understanding of what lay ahead of him.
Lee gets word of the skirmish and is told that a major Union force is at Gettysburg. Instead of sending a cavalry reconnaissance force to confirm the report, Lee orders his entire army to mobilize. It's a colossal mistake.
Lee decides to abandon the original plan. He gives up what we call strategic aim, and he makes the mistake of allowing operational developments to drive strategy.
Lee orders all his forces to converge at Cashtown, a small village 7 miles from Gettysburg. Some 60,000 Confederate troops begin to pour in from nearby Cashtown and Carlisle. 3,000 Union soldiers take position on McPherson Ridge. They try to hold off the onslaught of enemy soldiers until help arrives. But reinforcements are miles away toward Washington, D.C. So the Union soldiers withdraw southeast onto Cemetery Ridge, a range of hills that forms the shape of a fishhook. Cemetery Ridge provides an extremely strong defensive advantage.
The terrain is so obvious in favor of the defense that my guess is almost any second lieutenant from West Point would have chosen that ground given the opportunity to do it.
When Union General Hancock arrives, he declares it the best natural position he's ever seen. Lee immediately sees the danger of the Union's position. But because Union troops are still straggling in, he believes they are vulnerable. Lee then gives an order to Confederate General Ewell that many believe isn't really an order at all.
And Lee says to him, attack when you think it's practicable. Didn't order him to attack. Ewell knew on the battlefield, doesn't know what's going on, and decides not to attack.
Ewell decided that it was not practical because his troops were tired and they were exhausted, and he wanted a rest.
At Gettysburg, we see Lee issuing very unclear and very ambiguous orders to his subordinates.
Union reinforcements soon arrive and strengthen their position. Lee now faces an uphill battle. When the enemy occupies high ground, do not confront him. If he attacks downhill, do not oppose him. As night falls on the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg, Lee confers with another Confederate general, James Longstreet. Longstreet wants Lee to abandon the idea of attacking the Union high ground. Instead, he wants to march south around Cemetery Ridge, then east right toward Washington, D.C.
And this will force the Union Army to come off Cemetery Ridge and attack us where we are. And if they attack us, we will win.
But Lee says no. He points to Cemetery Ridge and says, "The enemy is there, and I am going to attack him there." Lee has completely given up his go strategy and reverts back to chess.
Longstreet is stunned. He sees the Union Army dug in on the hills and knows that they should not be attacked. Assess the situation, adjust your forces, find another way to attack the enemy.
But Lee doesn't listen. The second day of Gettysburg is hell on earth. Bucolic pastures are transformed into fields of slaughter. Places like Plum Run, the Peach Orchard, and Little Round Top see some of the bloodiest hand-to-hand combat of the war.
What's terrible about hand-to-hand combat is the memories. You know, for a lot of war, you can pull the trigger and maybe you see somebody drop. Maybe. Most often you don't. But this is up close and personal. This is bayonets, knives, rifle butts, pistol shots in the head, in the face, and you see it. And it takes a piece out of you. And that's why you have psychiatric casualties. God knows how many members of both sides remember that battle, you know, every night for the rest of their lives. And it's just gory beyond belief.
On top of Little Round Top is Union Colonel Joshua Chamberlain and the 20th Maine Regiment. They have survived 3 Confederate charges and are nearly out of ammunition.
And here comes the 4th attack. And Chamberlain orders fixed bayonets. Everybody fires the last 2 rounds they got, stands up, and in a great moment in history, stands on the wall with a saber and gives the command, which rings through the years of American infantry history. Follow me, boys. Bayonets forward. And down they go.
Union troops howl down the hill. Shocked at the charge, the Confederate soldiers retreat. Against all odds, the Union hangs on to Little Round Top, but this does not seem to deter Lee. The sun rises on the 3rd day of the Battle of Gettysburg. Despite the thousands of dead bodies strewn across the fields, Confederate General Robert E. Lee is about to order his troops to attack the high ground yet again.
One of the things you never want to do in war, never throw good money after bad. Use an attack to exploit a victory. Never use an attack to rescue a defeat. And Longstreet gets it.
General Longstreet once again suggests to Lee that they should move around Cemetery Ridge and threaten Washington, D.C. to draw the Union off the high ground.
Longstreet understands that the Confederates are in a terrible position. They are outnumbered. They do not have the high ground. They have suffered terrible casualties in the last 2 days of fighting, and that there's no real chance of pushing the Union Army off the high ground.
But Lee feels his men have sacrificed too much to turn back now. Lee gives the order to attack. The infantry charge is led by Major General George Pickett.
The story is Dutch Longstreet is sitting there, and Pickett says, "Shall I go, General? Shall I go?" And Longstreet just drops his head and looks away. "General, shall I go?" And Longstreet again looks away. He said, "General, I'm going into the attack." And Longstreet looked again away. Longstreet never gave the order to attack. He knew it was suicidal.
In the sweltering July heat, 12,500 Confederate soldiers, led by Pickett, make their determined march across an open field nearly a mile long. As they advance in close ranks, thousands are cut down by Union artillery and rifle fire.
There was nowhere they could hide. There was almost no range between the Union forces and the Confederate forces, and the Union forces were simply able to stand behind these reinforced positions and fire on the Confederates. And so the Confederates had no way of defending themselves.
To Pickett's men's bravery, they continued all the way up. And there's one whole unit from South Carolina that marched straight into the Rhode Island artillery guns and was destroyed by canister shot. The whole unit died instantaneously.
Of the more than 12,000 Confederate soldiers who made the charge, only 5,000 survived. The Battle of Gettysburg is over.
Sun Tzu would have been horrified at the tragic waste of Pickett's charge.
At Gettysburg, Lee doesn't adjust his strategy to the situations on the ground. He refuses to retreat, even when the situation is clearly hopeless.
And Lee takes off his hat, dismounts, and walks into the field and says, "It's all my fault, boys. It's all my fault." "You're right, General. It's all your fault." No one in his right mind would have ordered that.
In the end, his failure is one of the factors that costs the Confederates the war.
Thursday, November 19th, 1863. Before an estimated 15,000 spectators, President Abraham Lincoln dedicates a new soldiers' national cemetery at Gettysburg. In a few moments, he will deliver words that he hopes will guide the Union through the war and start the process of healing.
77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
Lincoln knew he had to raise the stakes of this thing, or else they'd stop. He knew he had to raise the stakes morally, and that's what the Gettysburg Address is about.
That from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause, for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain.
That short speech of 273 words became one of the most famous speeches in all of American history. Lincoln knew that we must prevail in this war if we are going to remain America.
That this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.